Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking something absolutely fascinating, highly complex, and incredibly serious. We're looking directly at thousands of pages of newly declassified U.S. intelligence documents, all about the historical Indo-Pak conflict. For decades, the exact mechanics of foreign intervention in South Asia were shrouded in heavy redactions, rumors, and straight-up diplomatic denial. But with these newly unsealed Freedom of Information Act releases, we finally have the raw data. Now, my goal here isn't to take sides or try to litigate the past. We're just going to objectively walk through exactly what the historical record now shows. We're going to see, through the intelligence community's own internal memos and cables, just how deeply covert operations actually shaped the balance of power in this region. There is a quote that perfectly sets the stage for us here. "This is not speculation. This is history." And honestly, that is the absolutely crucial framework to keep in mind as we dive into this dossier. When you're dealing with geopolitical conflicts, it's so easy to fall right into the trap of conspiracy theories or nationalist rhetoric, right? But the documents we're examining today, they confirm a highly specific, undeniable pattern of actions that caused documented harm to India. The records show that the United States intelligence apparatus knew exactly what it was doing during these pivotal decades. The unredacted files lay the whole thing out in black and white, tracing the shift from passive observation to very active intervention. Part 1. The declassified evidence and the overarching pattern. Let's dive right into Part 2, the Kahuta nuclear leak. This was a highly volatile period. Okay, to really grasp the stakes here, we have to look at the timeline of nuclear tension that escalated incredibly fast between 1974 and 1982. So in 1974, India conducts its first successful nuclear test, codenamed Smiling Buddha. Naturally, this sends absolute shockwaves through the region. Tensions keep mounting, and by 1981, a major global precedent is set when Israel preemptively bombs Iraq's Osirak nuclear reactor. Well, the declassified files show Pakistani leadership was absolutely terrified that India would execute a similar preemptive strike against their own developing enrichment facility at Kahuta. And honestly, their fears weren't entirely unfounded. Intelligence showed India was indeed exploring this option using newly acquired Jaguar aircraft. By 1981, the CIA is actively warning President Zia-ul-Haq about these potential strikes. But the climax of all this, that hits in 1982. According to internal documents, U.S. intelligence confirms the details of a highly classified Indian plan to destroy the Kahuta facility. And rather than stepping in diplomatically, the intelligence apparatus deliberately allows this secret strike plan to leak to the media. The geopolitical fallout from that calculated leak was immediate and, quite frankly, permanent. Because the strike plan was suddenly plastered in the international press, the critical element of surprise was just completely lost. India was forced to scrap the military operation entirely. Meanwhile, Pakistan, now fully alerted to exactly how close they came to losing their enrichment capabilities, takes this opportunity to heavily boost the air defenses around Kahuta. They scrambled interceptors, they installed French-made Crotile surface-to-air missiles, and put their entire air force on high alert. Simultaneously, they rapidly advanced their own nuclear program under A.K. Khan, knowing for sure they were operating on borrowed time. So because of this intentional intelligence leak, India essentially lost its one and only window of opportunity to conventionally stop Pakistan from becoming a nuclear-armed state. Moving on to Part 3, the covert arms pipeline during the 1965 and 1971 wars. 90. Now, this isn't just some random statistic. This number represents the approximate amount of heavy military assets. We're talking advanced fighter jets, missiles, and artillery pieces delivered to Pakistan during highly restricted periods. The really crucial context that these declassified files illuminate is that these heavy weapons deliveries happened during active, ongoing combat against India. We are talking about critical hardware, like F-104 starfighters and sophisticated armored vehicles. Think about it. When a nation is in the middle of a hot war, replacing lost aircraft and armor in real time completely alters the battlefield dynamics. It forces the opposing military, in this case India, to constantly pivot their strategy to account for an enemy whose supply lines are being covertly replenished by a superpower. So, you might be wondering, how exactly does all that hardware get there when official U.S. congressional embargoes were frequently in place? Well, the documents reveal a meticulously coordinated top-down workaround. U.S. President Richard Nixon and National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger personally directed this covert arrangement. To bypass legal restrictions and congressional oversight, they needed a cutout. So they coordinated directly with the Shah of Iran to act as a proxy purchasing agent. Basically, Iran would procure or transfer military hardware, like American-supplied fighter jets, and then quietly route them over to Pakistan. Because the equipment was technically moving through Tehran, it didn't have a giant, obvious U.S. return address stamped on it. It was a highly sophisticated, multinational shadow operation specifically designed to sustain an ally's military capacity during intense wartime scenarios. The depth of this strategic alliance went way beyond just covert hardware transfers, though. It was deeply rooted in the broader Cold War chess match. After the 1971 war concluded, which, by the way, was a war where the U.S. notoriously deployed Task Force 74, led by the nuclear-powered USS Enterprise, right into the Bay of Bengal, Henry Kissinger issued a highly classified private assurance to Pakistan. The declassified files reveal he stated, unequivocally, that the U.S. would react violently if India attacked again. Why such aggressive posturing? Well, Nixon and Kissinger were relying heavily on Pakistan to facilitate their secret diplomatic opening to China. They literally needed Islamabad. As a result, they were willing to draw firm, aggressive red lines against India, a country they viewed at the time as leaning a bit too closely toward the Soviet Union. This documentation neutrally but firmly establishes just how deeply committed the U.S. executive branch was to preserving Pakistan's structural integrity, regardless of the ultimate cost to India. Part 4. Funding militant infrastructure and the realities of proxy warfare. Let's rewind a bit to the 1980s during the Soviet-Afghan War. The CIA launched Operation Cyclone, which poured billions of dollars and vast resources into creating a massive militant training infrastructure to support the Mujahideen. They built training camps, they established complex logistical supply chains, and distributed massive caches of modern weaponry. But here's the thing. When the Soviet Union finally withdrew from Afghanistan in 1989, that vast, highly funded infrastructure didn't just vanish into thin air. The camps, the weapons, and the seasoned proxy fighters were simply repurposed. Under the guidance of Pakistani intelligence, this deeply entrenched militant network pivoted its geographic focus. The very same training facilities and supply lines that were built to bleed the Soviets in Kabul were redirected eastward, sending trained militants straight across the line of control to target Indian security forces in Kashmir. Now, the CIA's own unsealed files document an undeniable awareness of this shift. Washington knew perfectly well that the intelligence services in Islamabad were diverting resources and utilizing this proxy network to systematically bog down Indian troops. Internal memos explicitly detail this exact ISI militant nexus. And yet, as the historical records confirm, the U.S. basically turned a blind eye. They maintained their strategic and financial partnership anyway, fully aware of the asymmetric warfare and the devastating consequences unfolding on the ground for India. The strategic calculation in Washington was pretty clear. Maintaining leverage in the region and keeping a counterterrorism partner on paper was simply worth the collateral damage being inflicted on Indian soil. Part 5. Shielding the nuclear program through a sustained effort. Following India's 1974 nuclear test, a rapid domino effect kicks off. Almost immediately, Prime Minister Zulfikar Ali Bhutto initiates aggressive measures to counter India, which leads directly to Pakistan's dedicated nuclear weapon design response. The newly declassified intelligence explicitly acknowledges that the U.S. was closely tracking all these developments. They monitored the AQ-Con proliferation network, and they tracked the covert procurement of European centrifuge technology. Make no mistake, Washington was under no illusions that this was some peaceful civilian energy program. The intelligence community was fully aware that Pakistan began its weaponization work specifically and directly to achieve parity with India's 1974 test. They watched the entire board being set up from day one. But the intelligence apparatus didn't just observe this nuclear buildup. They actively engaged to protect it. In 1981, a full year before the media leak regarding the Kahuta strike plan, the CIA was already stepping in. Memos show they were providing briefings to both U.S. lawmakers and Pakistani military officials about potential Indian military movements. By giving Pakistan this continuous advance notice and sharing actionable intelligence, the U.S. actively enabled Pakistan to fortify its borders and prepare its defenses well ahead of any potential strike. So, the U.S. intelligence community crossed the critical line from passive intelligence gathering to actively shielding an ally's nascent nuclear program from being dismantled. Part 6. The historical record, and bringing it all into a cohesive narrative. When we actually pull all these declassified threads together, a remarkably consistent pattern emerges spanning multiple decades. We see direct nuclear enablement operating right in tandem with massive covert military supply chains designed specifically to bypass public scrutiny. And above all, we see documented, undeniable awareness at the highest levels of the U.S. government that these strategic choices would cause, and definitely did cause, direct harm to India. Understanding this specific historical foundation is absolutely crucial if you want to make sense of today's incredibly complex South Asian geopolitics. It explains exactly why India fiercely guards its strategic autonomy today and why deep-seated historical trust deficits still exist, even as modern alliances like the Quad are being formed. You truly cannot understand the cautious realities of present-day diplomacy without looking directly at the raw, unredacted data of the past. Which leaves us with a profound question to chew on. When covert alliances and shadow operations actively shape global conflicts for decades, who ultimately bears the cost of that declassified history? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this structured look at the primary sources has given you a clearer, much more nuanced understanding of these historical events. Stay curious, keep digging into the documents, and I'll catch you next time.